We are going to be talking with Dr. Toyin Weaver and medical student Abel here today, who are in Reno. So Toyin was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and raised in London, Ontario, Canada. She attended St. Lawrence University and is a 2008 graduate of Upstate Medical University. She completed her residency in family medicine at Albany Medical Center, where she served as chief resident. She's currently a board-certified family medicine physician in Reno, Nevada, where she works as an urgent care physician and has been on the front lines testing and treating patients with COVID-19. So you're going to hear all about her work today. She's got over 13 years of experience, and her specialties include hyperbaric oxygen therapy, wound care, hospitalist medicine, and urgent care. She is also a clinical instructor of family medicine at the University of Nevada, Reno School of Medicine, which brings us to Abel Edossa, who is 24 years old and a first-year medical student at UNR. He was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada, and went to UNR for college, where he majored in biochemistry and molecular biology. So you'll get to see the path of a doctor and the path of a medical student today. While they're talking, I just want to remind you all that we become doctors and scientists by asking lots of questions in this world that lead us in all different sorts of directions. So there are no stupid questions whatsoever. And while you're listening to these two talk, I want you all to come up with some questions, and we'll have time to do some Q&A after their presentation. So feel free to take it away, guys.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction. So we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. So my name is Abel, and I'm joined by Dr. Weaver today. I'll be covering the first part of the presentation, where I'll be talking a little bit about my path, and then going into some of the specifics that you guys need in order to find your way onto the path to medicine. So this is the general timeline. I don't want you guys to be intimidated by the time commitment. And so the general way that it works is, after you graduate from high school, there are kind of 4 steps before you're officially a practicing physician. The very first step is going to be your undergraduate degree. So that would be college. You can major in anything. It takes about 4 to 6 years. The next step would be your undergraduate medical education. So this is also what people refer to as medical school. This will take about 4 years, but you can add on a secondary degree, which would add some more time. After that, you would complete your graduate medical education. This is referred to as residency. And this is the first time where medical students are able to get specific training and really pick their specialty of choice. And then finally, there's an optional part at the very end called fellowship. And it's something that allows people to subspecialize if they want to practice an even more specific part of medicine. So for example, let's say that you are wanting to become a hospitalist, so you go into internal medicine, but you really, really like kidneys, you would do a fellowship in nephrology. And that's how you would become a nephrologist, who is a doctor who specifically works with kidneys. So that is the general timeline. Going back and talking a little bit more about how it's relevant to you guys. So after you graduate from high school, the very next step, if you're interested in medicine, is you're going to need to complete an undergraduate degree of some kind. So at the time of your application, you need approximately 90 credits. And those 90 credits would be towards your degree. But the nice part about applying to medical school is that your major can be in absolutely anything. And so it could be English, it could be music, it can be dance. It could be anything that you find interesting, as long as you're covering specific prerequisites to medical school. I'll talk about what those prerequisites are on the next slide. But for this part, I just want to emphasize that whatever you guys are interested in college, you can major in it. And it's really good to do something that you're interested in, because it allows studying to be a little bit easier on you. And then also, if you can do something super cool like theater, there's a theater major in my first year medical school class. It really helps you stand out amongst the sea of other applicants, and it gives you something to talk about. After talking a little bit more about the MCAT, so once you are in college and you've chosen a major and you have your 90 credits, you generally take the MCAT during your junior or senior year. The MCAT is an 8-hour-long exam, and think of it like the SAT for medical school. And so it'll cover 4 different topics, 4 major topics, but basically it prepares you and allows the admissions committee to see whether or not you have a good foundation to start medical school and what your specific strengths and weaknesses are. So moving on, talking a little bit about the specific prerequisites. So like I mentioned earlier, in college, you can major in absolutely anything, but these are the classes that you need to take for UNR Med, and it's similar for all med schools. And so no matter what major you pick, you're going to need to take 15 credits of biology. So this would include introduction to biology, cell biology, excuse me. It would include anatomy and physiology, which you guys are currently taking, and just includes everything about the way that life works. Chemistry, you need a minimum of 8 credits. Usually this is 2 semesters of general chemistry. And so this would include things that you guys are probably learning about in your chemistry classes now, but just a little bit further. Organic chemistry is something that scares a lot of people, but I would say don't let it scare you. You also need 2 semesters of organic chemistry with also 2 credits of lab, just like regular chemistry. In long story short, organic chemistry is just the way that reactions work, I would say, on more of a molecular level. And so when you are adding hydrogen to oxygen, you're going to learn where the electrons go in each of these elements and how they transfer over. And then eventually you get to learn about different kinds of reactions and how those work as well. Organic chemistry is super duper important for pharmacology, but you can learn way more about that later. You'll need 3 credits of biochemistry. So biochemistry is just the way that chemical reactions work in order to support life. I won't go into too much more detail, but this is what I majored in undergrad. Physics, so you need 2 semesters of physics, including 2 credits of lab. Even though physics sounds like it's pretty unrelated to medicine, I can tell you that it definitely is something we have to think about every single day. For example, when I was in the middle of my cardiology block, when we were learning about different occlusions and blood flow, it's really important to realize different aspects about blood flow, like how the size of an artery, the size of the opening or the lumen affects the speed of the flow, whether or not something on the wall of that lumen is going to affect turbulence, how that turbulence will lead to like a slowdown of blood in that specific part of the body. And so even though physics seems really out there, it is also super important. And then the final prerequisite is going to be psychology. And psychology is really important because it's important to realize how your patients think and how thought processes affect people's attitudes towards the world. And if you're interested in psychiatry, it's something that also will be super duper important. Talking a little bit more specifically about my path. So I am originally from Las Vegas, and I completed my undergraduate in biochemistry and molecular biology from UNR. So after being born and raised in Vegas, came up to Reno, and I've loved it ever since. UNR is an amazing place. To talk broadly about the application to medical school. So there are a couple things that all medical schools really look for. They look for volunteering to show that you are dedicated to helping people and that it's something that you genuinely enjoy. They look for clinical experience so that they know that you know what being a doctor is like and that your experience isn't completely from watching Grey's Anatomy, that you've worked with a doctor, that you've had some experience in the clinical field and know what you're signing up for. And then they also look for research. And the research part is really important because with research, it allows you to show your ability to think critically and to solve problems that other people haven't solved. So that's really important. So about my volunteering, I volunteered at the Boys and Girls Club, which is a nonprofit organization to help youth make the most of their time and just help underserved children with different resources like tutoring and homework help and stuff like that. The Student Outreach Clinic is a free clinic that we put on as medical students at UNR Med. So we have patients from all over the community come in and we get practice treating them. Nevada Student Ambassadors is a club I did on the side, which basically allowed me to practice my public speaking skills, where I gave tours of the university and was also able to kind of practice professionalism from there as well. For my clinical experience, I shadowed internal medicine and emergency medicine. I would highly, highly recommend that you guys shadow as many specialties as you are interested in before applying to medical school, just so that you really get a good idea of what it's like, because it is very different than what you'll see in the TV shows. I also worked as a medical scribe for a little bit and then an optometric technician. And then for research, I completed my senior thesis in for the biochemistry department during undergrad, and mine was about bergamot nanodisc and statin toxicity. I won't bore you with the details, but like I was mentioning earlier, research is really important for being able to show the admissions committee that you can think critically, you can examine a situation, and that you're able to solve a problem. And that's something that you're going to be doing a lot in medicine. You're always going to be solving problems and thinking outside the box. And then the second research experience I had, I just worked on differentiation and activation of T cells and systemic sclerosis from a cool internship I was able to do in Germany. So going a little bit back, the last thing that you need on top of a good GPA and what we talked about previously is a MCAT score, preferably a good one. So the MCAT is that 8-hour test. Usually people will take it the summer before their senior year or the summer after their senior year. So I did it the summer after my senior year, the summer after graduation. And I liked that because it allowed me to take the classes that I took my senior year and also get that information and allow me to apply that to my test taking skills. Also, I was in Germany for the summer before my senior year, so I didn't really have an amazing opportunity to study. The final thing I'll talk about is a gap year. And so on your path to medicine, some students choose to take a gap year or an enrichment year before they apply to medical school. So this is just 1 year before you officially start medical school. For mine, I worked as a recruiter for UNR, and I really, really like that because it allowed me to get some experience working my first full-time job. And I feel like it was also a really great break from school. Like you guys saw in this slide, if you do everything that's on here, it's a minimum of about 12 years after you graduate from high school. And so the path to medicine really is a marathon, not a sprint. And with that gap year, I was able to take a little break from school, recharge my batteries, and really examine what I wanted for my career. And so now I'm a first-year medical student. In a week, I'll be a second-year medical student because we're about to finish up our first year. And now I'll be turning it over to Dr. Weaver to talk about her path and how she works.
Thank you, Abel. That was great. So we can kind of skip over this first slide. Abel kind of went over what the pathway is to get into medical school. So like Leah said in the introduction, I was born in Lagos, Nigeria. I moved to Canada when I was 2, and I was raised there. I graduated from high school in Staten Island, New York, and then I went to college in upstate New York, St. Lawrence University. I was trying to get as close to Canada as I could. So St. Lawrence is very close to the border, so that's why I chose St. Lawrence. So my path to medicine, I actually didn't grow up wanting to be a doctor. My aunt was an OBGYN doctor, and so I had vivid memories of her always being paged at family events, and her having to leave. So I was like, well, why would I want to do that? So I wanted to be a lawyer. I love arguing. Everybody in my family thought that would be a great profession for me. And then kind of later on, I switched to psychology. I liked trying to delve into the way that people think and help them solve their problems. And I don't know exactly when I made the switch. I was thinking about that when I was getting ready for this presentation. But I just kind of started to look at different career paths, how long it would take, what I need to do in college, how long it would take after college to become whatever it was that I wanted to become. And then something that probably people don't really talk to you about much, and it might be a taboo subject, but I also start to look at how much I would be compensated for doing my job. I was starting to think about what kind of life I wanted when I was grown up. I knew I wanted kids. I knew I wanted to be able to spend time with my kids. I wanted to travel. And so thinking, yes, you have to do what you love, but you kind of also think about, how all that is going to come together. So at some point I decided, I didn't have to have the type of career my aunt had. There was a lot of different careers in medicine and a lot of different ways to be a doctor. So I decided that being a doctor would be the best route for me. So in high school, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, I was mainly a 3-sport athlete. I played basketball, volleyball, and track and field. And kind of towards the end, when I started realizing, okay, I need that volunteer experience that I'm going to need for my applications, I volunteered at the Red Cross, and I also worked in nursing homes. So then I went to college. I went to St. Lawrence, and I started my summers by doing research projects. So I would spend every summer, instead of going home, I would go. My first one was at Columbia University. I worked with a professor there, and I don't remember exactly what the research project was because I'm a lot older than Abel. This many moons ago. But I remember working with mice and having to dissect mice, and all this was very new to me because, like I mentioned, I didn't decide I wanted to be a doctor until much later on. Once I realized that the path to medicine was definitely what I wanted to do, and actually the way I realized that was my sophomore year. I did a summer at Columbia University. So they had all the students live on campus, and we got to do, as Abel said, it's important to shadow as many specialists as possible. So each week we were with a different specialist, and so I got to go in the operating room for the first time. I got to go in family medicine offices and sit in on visits. I got to see my first baby being born, just all these different experiences. And I decided, okay, this was really what I wanted to do. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. Actually, Abel, if you could go to the next slide for a second. So when I decided that I definitely wanted to go to med school, my advisor told me about a program at one of the medical schools that we were affiliated at, SUNY Upstate, and that stands for State University of New York, which is in Syracuse, New York. And they had a program which was called an early assurance program. So that meant if I applied, did well with my interview and got accepted, then I would actually be a medical student after my second year of college, after my sophomore year. And this was great because it kind of took some of that pressure off. At that point, now you have to do the MCATs, but at the point where I applied, you didn't have to do the MCATs. But you still had to maintain a 3.5 GPA in the sciences, still had to do all the science requisitions. But it just allowed me to, like I said, kind of take the pressure off and take other classes that I probably wouldn't have taken if I was bogged down taking science classes and focusing on the MCAT. So I took literature classes, I took some drama classes, I took some writing classes, I did an African studies class. Just things that, once again, I probably wouldn't have done because the first 2 years I basically lived on the science side of the campus because I was so focused into getting into med school. So Abel, you can go back to that next slide there. And then once I got into med school, like I said, my first 2 summers I spent doing medical research and summer internships that were kind of devoted to medicine. But once I got into med school, I kind of pivoted. So my junior year, I actually spent teaching high school students, and we got to develop whatever class we wanted. And so the class I designed was we would read a book and then we would watch the movie. And so we would talk about the differences between the book and the movie. And that was a really fun class, and it had nothing to do with medicine, and it was just really relaxing, and it was good to be around high school students. And I actually got paid a little bit of money to do that too. So that was pretty fun. So once I started medical school, let's see where we are here. Once I started med school, Abel, if you could go 2 slides ahead. Kind of deciding your career. So the first 2 years of med school is kind of, actually, can you go 1 back? Sorry. The first 2 years of med school is based on gaining the knowledge that you need to become a doctor. So the classes were probably like some of the classes you're doing now. We would have different units, and we'd spend 6 weeks. It would be all on the musculoskeletal system, and that's when we would have our anatomy class, and we'd get to what's the word escaping me now? We'd get to dissect the cadaver, and we would have our heart, our cardiovascular unit. We would do the GI system. We'd learn about all the different units at like the molecular level, as Abel was talking about. all along, we would also have classes like practice of medicine and communications classes, because not only do you need to know the science behind the medicine, but you need to know about the patients that you're going to treat. You need to know about what makes people think the way they think, what makes people react the way they think. You can't treat a patient if you don't understand how they're going to react to what you're saying to them, and how their upbringing may make them react to you differently. So we had a lot of classes that were based on that as well too. And we would have practice patients come in all the time. And they wouldn't give you easy patients. They would have patients that would kind of test you and let you put that what you've learned to work. So that's the first 2 years of medicine. And on the next slide, you'll see with the clerkships. So once you've kind of got down all the basics of medicine, that's when you get to go into the hospitals and the doctor's offices and start shadowing and seeing what the different specialties do. So everybody's on a different track, and you basically spend 6 to 8 weeks on each of these tracks, sometimes even just a month. But I'll just take a look at the first one here. So for example, you'll do a couple of weeks of medicine, then you'll do your psychiatry rotation. And with the psychiatry rotation, they kind of split that in half. So you'll do half of that in outpatient medicine, because there's outpatient psychiatrists who, what you see on TV, sitting on the couch talking to a psychiatrist. And then you have your inpatient medicine, where you're dealing with patients that are in the hospital. You have your neurology rotation, your OBGYN rotation. And that's another one that's split between being in the office and then actually being in the hospital and getting to help deliver babies. You have your pediatrics rotation, and then you also have your family medicine rotation, and then you have your emergency medicine and surgery rotations. They also build in a couple of units where you can start to, once you've kind of experienced some of those electives or those rotations, you have electives where you can kind of start narrowing down what you want to do. So that's the next 2 years of medicine. And basically by the time you're after your 3rd year of medicine, you kind of have to know what you want to do, because that's when you're going to apply to residency. And when you apply to residency, it's kind of like interviewing to med schools, but there's a whole match system. And you'll go to all these different interviews, and then you'll get put into a computer, you'll rank your schools, the schools will rank you, and then you're matched where you go. So you don't always get to go to the exact school you want, but then you end up going to residency. And on the next slide, you'll see that each residency is a different amount of time. So kind of the general medicines, which is emergency medicine, family medicine, internal, and pediatrics, are 3 years of residency. And so that's after you graduate med school. So you have your 4 years of med school, and then you have 3 years if you're doing one of those specialties. You'll see there's a couple other that are 4 years. There's some that are 5 years, and then there's some that are even 7 years. So just depending on what you decide to go into, that determines how much time you'll have to spend after med school. So, and just to clarify, once you graduate from med school, you're a medical doctor, but you can't see patients until you finish your residency and pass some board exams. Even within the different residencies. So for example, family medicine is 3 years. You can do a fellowship afterwards and specialize. So there's a geriatrics fellowship where you're dealing with elderly patients. There's a sports medicine. Which is kind of like orthopedics, where you're dealing with sports injuries. So all these different residencies also have fellowships afterwards. So you can keep going if you still have energy to do. Next slide. And I'll just kind of go briefly on this slide because just to kind of give you an idea, you do have to get licensed throughout medical school. So there's 3 different US medical licensing exams that you have to take. So step 1 is after your first or second year of med school. And that's basically just on the medical knowledge that you've learned in the first 2 years of medicine. Then you have step 2, which is broken into 2 parts. One is clinical knowledge, and then the other is based on how you deal with patients. So it's basically patient scenarios. What would you do? And then step 3 is when you mine was in Philadelphia. There's different locations all over the country, but you actually go and you have patient encounters. So they give you a scenario and you have to go into the room and kind of go through the scenario, how you would treat that patient. And so you have to pass all 3 of those. And then after med school is done and you do your residency, whatever you go, whatever your residency is, they have their own board exam you have to take as well. So I had to do a board exam in family medicine to become board certified. You're not able to see patients if you don't pass that exam. And then every 10 years you have to renew, or each specialty has their timeline, but you have to renew your certification. And then along the ways, you have to meet certain requirements just to make sure that you're keeping up your clinical knowledge. So next slide, please. So now I'm graduated, I'm a resident, I'm board certified. What am I going to do with myself? After all this schooling, I'm finally done. So what I decided to do with my path was actually as a 3rd-year medical student, I started working by becoming a pediatric. So the hospital where I worked, once I passed my last exam, they would allow you to work while you were still in residency. So I thought this was a great opportunity because I was in an environment where I had trained. Everybody knew me, but they kind of knew that I was still learning. So they kind of took it a little easier on me. So it was a great place to have my first job. So I would take a couple shifts a month and I would moonlight and I would make more money than I did as a resident, which was great. So I took that opportunity whenever it was available. My husband was still in residency when I finished residency. He did an anesthesiology residency, so his was 4 years instead of the 3 that mine was. So while he was finishing up, I took a job as a hospitalist. And hospitalist medicine, as Abel mentioned before, you would do your residency in internal medicine, and you would basically take care of the patients that are admitted to the hospital. So you would meet them down in the emergency room after the emergency doctor had done their workup. You would admit them to the floor, make sure they got all their medicines, make sure they got all their testing, and kind of follow them throughout their stay in the hospital until they were ready to be discharged, and follow up with their doctor on the outside. So I did that for 2 years. And then when we moved to Reno, Nevada, I kind of took a job that I never thought that I would take. I became a wound care specialist. At that point, we had 9-month-old twins, and my husband's job was a little crazy, so I wanted something that would allow me more free time. So I became a wound care and hyperbaric medicine specialist at Renown. And it was a cool job. I got on the job training because I had done basic wound care in high school, in medical school and residency, but I hadn't done anything as in depth as what this job was requiring. And one of the coolest things about hyperbaric medicine is we got to work with the Navy base out in Fallon. So when any of the when any of the pilots had decompression sickness, like if their airplane depressurized too quickly, we got to treat them in the hyperbaric chamber, which was really cool. The really uncool thing about that was I suddenly became like my aunt, and there was never an emergency during 5. It always happened in the evening. So had many nights, well, not too frequent, but had many nights in the in the in the hospital treating these patients, because the treatment for that takes 6 to 8 hours. So and it wasn't just pilots, we also had divers that would experience that. So one of my coolest stories was actually right before Labor Day weekend. We had a diver that was setting up the fireworks on Lake Tahoe. And he dived down too quickly, because a lot of the stuff that they do for those fireworks, because the fireworks are on the lake, a lot of that stuff is actually underwater. So he ended up getting what you would call the bends, decompression sickness. And so we had to treat him rather quickly, because he was the only one trained to do it. And if he wasn't better, there was going to be no fireworks. So that was about 2 to 3 years ago. And that was one of the coolest experiences I had. And a cool thing about that was we were actually planning on staying up at the lake that weekend. So I got to kind of see the end result of being better. And we had a fireworks show. So that was pretty cool. So after I did that for a while, decided to switch, because now my kids were going to be in school, and I kind of wanted a more stable schedule. So I became an urgent care physician. And so what an urgent care doctor does is we have many different locations in town, and we treat patients who if you can't get into your doctor, we're a walk-in clinic and we're available to treat you. So we see a lot of urinary tract infections, people with cough, colds, people who need stitches, broken bones, just a lot of different things. But what I really like about this job is that it's 7 to 5. So it allows me to still be home with my kids after school. I have a set schedule, so I can still make their field trips and class activities. And so this last year has been a little crazy for everyone, and especially for us in medicine, as we've tried to navigate COVID and getting everybody to keep people healthy. But it's been very rewarding, because even when everybody else was shut down, we were still going. We still had to come to work. We still had to take care of people. So I think one of the coolest things about becoming a doctor is that kind of no matter what's going on around you, there's always jobs available. I've had 4 different, very different jobs as a family medicine physician. And it just kind of keeps things very interesting. So, and then if you go to the next slide, I just threw a couple slides in. Still always opportunities to do things outside of, my work. I appear on the news occasionally, always educating. Education doesn't stop once the patient leaves the exam room. So this particular photo was from a session I did on why it's important to get the flu vaccine. And so I did another one on why it's important for people to get the shingles vaccine. So just always educating patients. Prevention is a huge part of primary care. Hopefully we can get people to take care of themselves and do the right steps before they actually need to see their doctor. And I'll just leave you with this last slide here. If you could, yeah, perfect. And that's just in full gear. That's how we had to see patients for the last year, just trying to keep us safe. And then we've now transitioned down to, now that we're all vaccinated, we're still masked up, but we don't have to wear the air pressurizing system. So thank you.
All right. Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you. Turn on the light so we don't we wake up a little bit. And then questions that you guys have for these guys, both Toyin, who's the doctor, and then Abel, the medical student. Someone has a question. All right, Samantha.
How hard is it on a scale from 1 to 10?
How hard is what?
Medical, to be a medical student.
Okay, so maybe like yeah. So how hard is it on a scale from 1 to 10? So maybe you could like how many hours a week do you spend in classes / studying in medical school?
Yeah, so medical school, it is much, much more demanding than high school and college, as you can probably imagine. And because it's a graduate program at this point, there's a lot more requirements on us as far as professionalism, building our CV, any activities we do outside of class. And so I would say if we're talking about just the clinical part, so this would be our classes, this would be anatomy dissection when we go and dissect the cadaver. This would be practice of medicine where we learn how to take a full history, physical exam, all that stuff. It's about 40 to 45 hours per week of just class stuff. And then if you do anything on top, which nowadays you kind of have to, so any volunteering you do, any teaching on the side, research, other experiences, that adds another 5 to 10 hours a week. And so I would say total the time commitment's about 50 to 55 hours, but it can be more or less depending on how efficient you are with your time and whether or not you attend class.
And then how does that compare to your like the hours you put in when you were working on the job you were saying the hyperbolic thing where you had to go and take care of patients and so like how many hours a week would you say that you worked when you weren't in the now in urgent care you're more of a 7 to 5 job?
Right.
Yeah.
So kind of going back to medical school. So medical school is basically Monday through Friday. So you're in classes from 7:30 to 7:38 till about 4 o'clock. The way my school worked was Wednesday afternoon was always kind of like our free time to catch up and study or just relax or do whatever you needed to do. So it's basically Monday to Friday, and then all the extras depended on you. I mean, I was the kind of student who always needed to, I knew I wasn't a good test taker. I knew it took me longer to absorb things. So I always had to put in more. I was so frustrated and annoyed that my husband or then boyfriend was not that way. So he was never studying. He'd be one of the first people to walk out of exams, and I would still be on page 1. So in terms of the difficulty, it's going to be a little different for everybody just because, of whatever skills that you bring in and however long it takes you to absorb the information. Now, so in hyperbaric medicine, most specialties or whatever job you're going to do, it's going to be, let's say, 7 a.m. till about 5 p.m. And then whether or not your job has call requirements, that's when the overnight part comes in. So even when I was working with wound care and hyperbaric medicine, I was working 8 to 5, but I knew there'd be nights when I was on call. Well, there was only 2 of us trained, so it would be, they would call whoever could come in and we would come in. And honestly, that only happened, it would happen a lot more frequently in the summer just because a lot more people were diving. But, I'd probably have to come in, let's say, once or twice a month, and I would be there for 6 to 8 hours. The nice part is once the patient went to the chamber, we had attendants sitting at the chamber, so you could go to sleep if you wanted, and the attendant would watch them. So the nice part is medical school and residency is hard, but once you get out, the freedom to do what type of job you want and to have type of lifestyle you want. As you've seen, I've had 4 different careers since graduating, and they've all kind of had a little bit of different time requirements. When I was a hospitalist, I would go in at 7:30. I'd be done whenever I was done rounding on patients. So I'd probably be responsible for 20 to 22 patients a day. And whenever I was done, that's when I could leave. And then I would do like a week of nights every other month.
Nice. Any other questions? No, no one has questions.
Toyin, I have a question. I wonder if I could stick in here. Abel, you covered a lot about what the education piece looks like and how in your training you have to study all the different types of systems of the body so that you can figure out what you want to specialize in. And now, Toyin, now that you've gone a little broader and you're an urgent care doctor that probably sees a lot of different types of injuries, are you working with all different systems of the body all the time? And can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, and that's actually what I love about urgent care is that I see a little bit of everything. So in a typical day, I could see somebody with a urinary tract infection, somebody with pneumonia, somebody that's having a heart attack that needs to be sent to the hospital, somebody that has a fracture, somebody that has a rash that I can't figure out what it is, or they can't figure out what it is, which is why they're coming to us. So yeah, I was going to say before, it's funny when I watch Grey's Anatomy, you see the doctors doing a little bit of everything. So you see the plastic surgeon delivering babies, and that's not what happens. You kind of stick to your specialty and you do what you do. But in primary care, you do get to see, sometimes you do get to do a little bit of everything. You're kind of like a jack of all trades, which keeps the day very interesting. I see babies, I see middle-aged people, I think my oldest patient was 104. So these things very interesting.
To quickly add on to that, because there's such a breadth of knowledge you need to have, I think that's one of the reasons that medical school has a reputation for being difficult, because you're expected to learn so much in such a short amount of time. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but like Dr. Weaver was mentioning, it is all about just how quickly you can absorb it. And it's just really important to look at your college experience, look at your high school experience, and ask yourself if you're done with learning, because it is a super long path. And you want to make sure that it's right for you.
And things are always changing. One of the reasons I asked Abel to join me today, and I'm very thankful that he did, is I graduated over 10 years now. And even in the application process, even what they're requiring is completely different than what they were requiring when I was when I was applying to become a med student. So even now that I'm done, I'm still studying. I look up patients daily. I call my friends in other specialties, and I say, hey, what would I do with this patient if it's an OBGYN patient or somebody with a rash? And it's nice when you do have that community of physicians that are other specialties. I ask my husband all the time, what would you do with this patient? And so you're constantly learning, because medicines are changing, new diseases are popping up, how we treat them, what we're learning about the body. That changes as well too. So it's fun to just keep expanding your knowledge and having different ways to help your patients.